Hello and welcome back to this course of videos on MongoDB. In this video we will be inserting documents into our collection, and then we will be doing something similar in the MySQL database. So first thing we need to do is start our MongoDB server running with our mongod command. This will start our server listening on localhost on port 27017. Now, instead of opening up a separate command prompt to connect to our MongoDB via command line interface, we're going to use a tool called RoboMongo. Now this is free download, and this allows you to connect to your Mongo database with a GUI, a graphical user interface, as opposed to a CLI, a command line interface, as we did before. So go to robomongo.org, click download. It's extremely simple to follow the steps, and you will have RoboMongo installed on your computer. If I start up RoboMongo, I'm just going to remove this connection so I can show you how it's done from scratch. So you create a connection for the first time. I'm just going to call my connection 1. I do want it to connect to localhost, because localhost is where my Mongo server is currently running, 127.0.0.1, and as we just saw on startup, it is listening on port 27017. So I'm going to save that and connect. So we can see here now, this is a visual representation of my MongoDB database. In the last lesson, we created our database called ShoeStore, and then we created a collection within ShoeStore called customers. If I right click and view documents, you'll see there's nothing in there right now. We want to change that, and we want to add our first document. I've actually pre-prepared the code to insert, so we don't have to wait around. And I'm going to copy and paste this in here. Now, just to explain how this works, DB is, as we mentioned before, represents similar to a Java. It is a JavaScript object, really. DB represents our ShoeStore database. That's what this DB object represents. Now, within the DB object, we have the customers object, which represents the customers collection. So within our database, we have a collection. Now, on our customers collection object, we run our insert method. Now, this method, we can see we've got the starting and ending parameters there, and within these parameters we have this object. Now this is a JSON object, as we mentioned in the previous video. JSON is what MongoDB uses to store its data. It's not strictly JSON, it's a derivative of called BSON, which is binary JSON, just a binary conversion of JSON, but JSON is the basic idea. So this JSON, as we previously mentioned, with JSON objects, the key of the key value is always surrounded by quotes. It's always a string. However, the value portion can be multiple different types of objects. We have an integer here, and we actually have an array here. So within JSON objects, as I said, the key is string, but the value can be many different objects. So I'm just going to commit this, and we'll see it inserted one record. Now, let's just go and take a look. I'm going to view documents now. Right-click on the customers collection and view documents. And you can see it is actually added this extra field. This is called ID field, and the data type is object ID. Now that is a data type that is specific to BSON, the binary JSON I mentioned before, which is how data is stored in MongoDB. Now what it's done is it's automatically added a primary key called _ID. Now if we'd have gone in and explicitly created our _ID field, we could have created that primary key ourselves. We left it out, so MongoDB creates the primary key for you. So that is our first document inserted into our collection. Now, inserting more than one document into a collection is similar. I have this code copied ready here as well. I'm going to copy that code in and just take a quick look at it. So you'll notice that we have the same syntax, db.customers.insert, and we have our opening brackets. But instead of going straight to the document, the object, we are actually creating an array here. That's the array start, and this is the array end. So within this array, we have two separate documents, two separate JSON objects separated by a comma. Now, one other thing you might notice about this insert here, so our first document has exactly the same fields as the original document that we submitted. However, the second document is missing age, and it's actually adding an extra field. So we might think that that would fail because it's not following the format of the previous record we submitted. However, if I commit this, you see it inserted the records fine. If I view my documents now, you can see again, these first two records have the same fields exactly. ID, first name, last name, age, address, city, postal code, email address. But this third document is missing the age field, and it actually has an extra field called shoe size. Now, and it didn't complain at all. But this goes back to the fact that this is how different relational databases are to NoSQL databases. A relational database would never have allowed you to do that because it has fixed schema. It would have fixed these field names and field data types up front, so fixed the schema, and then we couldn't have added an extra field because that would go against the schema. But it goes back to NoSQL being schema-less. The schema-less nature of NoSQL databases such as Mongo allows us to do this kind of thing, to add extra fields on the fly that you wouldn't be able to do with with SQL relational databases. And we'll actually go and have a look at that exactly now by going into MySQL. Now, to access MySQL, I'm actually going to look at use an application similar to our RoboMongo, which gives us a GUI interface to work with our SQL, with our MySQL database, and that's called MySQL Workbench. So I'm going to log into here, very, very similar to the way we logged in using the command line interface, just using root as my username and logging in with my password. And here is my the MySQL Workbench, so my GUI representation of my MySQL relational database. I have my shoe store database here. I've actually pre-created the tables that you would need to populate my data that you see in RoboMongo. So you can see it here is interesting. We actually had to create two tables. Now, the first table that we created is customers. If I open up and view my table here, you can see I've added the 3 records in as we did in our MongoDB. However, you can see that I haven't added email address, the email address field. I've left that out of my customers table. And the reason for that is we can see that in many cases our email address field has more than one entry. So we've used arrays to hold this data because we have these multiple values. Now, if I added an email address field here and stored multiple values, I would end up duplicating my rows. I would have to have 2 rows for I'd have to have repeat James Murphy, 43, address, city, Vancouver, postal code, and then the first email address, then repeat that whole row and the second email address. Now, with relational databases, you do not want to repeat rows like that. That is called redundancy, and we try to avoid that at all costs, and in order to avoid that, we normalize, as we spoke about in the previous video. So normalization, the way I've normalized is I've actually created a completely separate table to hold my email addresses, and I'm going to use this ID field to reference. So if we open up the customer emails, we can see that there's my customer ID here that joins with my ID here, and then here's my email addresses. So I'm repeating, I'm putting my two email addresses for customer ID 1 here, but I'm avoiding duplicating this row. So this is normalization in relational databases. When I query, I will join or link the ID field here to the ID field here in order to give a full view of this data. However, this normalization into separate tables, as we've done here, is achieved in MongoDB simply by embedding this array in this single document. So, and this is one of the benefits of MongoDB and what makes it horizontally scalable, is that we can documents tend to be very self-containing. All the information for this particular customer is embedded and contained in this one document, so we can horizontally scale. Whereas in this SQL database, it's spread across these two across these two tables. And so finally, just to show you how we insert a record in a SQL database, such as MySQL, I'm going to insert a record here in our customers table. So first thing I need to do is, just as we did in our MongoDB, I need to use the ShoeStore database. So I'm going to click this lightning rod here, and you'll see that that was successful. Use ShoeStore. And now I'm just going to paste this insert into statement here, which is going to insert into the customers table. So you can see the syntax is quite different to our MongoDB SQL, where we just had db.collection.insert, and then we added the documents. Here we have insert into, and then the table name, and we have to specify our schema again, back to the fact that we're very rigid. We rigidly have to stick to our schema. I have to actually explicitly spell out the schema, the field names that I am going to insert into here, and once I've done that, I write the keyword values, and then I state the values that I want to insert into my table. So if you remember, none of this existed on the MongoDB side. If I hit the lightning rod again, we can see that this successfully inserted. If I go back to my customers table, we can see we have this extra row inserted here. So I hope this gives you a good overview of the differences between MongoDB NoSQL database and MySQL relational database when inserting documents into collections, or on the relational side, inserting rows into tables. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video.